Thank you for spending time with us today. And this is a workshop or a presentation in a series that we share. And the goal and the purpose behind them is, from the Calgary Adapted Hub powered by Jumpstart's perspective, is to be a conduit of knowledge translation and discussion and conversation as it relates to topics related to adapted physical activity. And so we were really fortunate and thrilled that you'd be able to join us today and to focus specifically on adaptive physical education. And so if you'll allow me, I'm going to read your bio so I can provide the lay of the land and provide a bit of a benchmark for people to understand who's going to be speaking with us today. So Martin Block is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Virginia, where he's the director of the Kinesiology for Individuals with Disabilities graduate program. Professor Block is internationally known for his work on including children with disabilities in general physical education. More recently, Professor Block has written on physical activity for children with autism spectrum disorder. Professor Block is the author of over 100 peer-reviewed articles, 23 chapters, and 6 books on adaptive physical education and motor development, including A Teacher's Guide to Including Students with Disabilities in General Physical Education, now in its 4th edition. Developmental and Adaptive Physical Activity Assessment, now in its 2nd edition, and Inclusive Physical Education Around the World, Origins, Cultures, and Practices. Professor Block is past president, I'm the current president, so I followed after Dr. Block, of the International Federation of Adapted Physical Activity, and he's also the National Consortium for Physical Education for Individuals with Disabilities board member. Friends, welcome to Dr. Block. Thank you for joining us today. My apologies for not being able to spend the entire time with you, and I look forward to your presentation and then hearing about the conversation afterwards from Letitia. So Dr. Block, over to you.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm excited, honestly, to get your feedback on what I have to say today about what we see down here in Virginia and in the States regarding physical education for children with disabilities. So am I able to share my screen, hopefully? Let's see.
Yep. You should be able to.
Perfect.
There you go. So they're coming up right now.
Great. Okay. So my focus today is going to be on realities and challenges of inclusive physical education. And the overarching theme, well, I guess there's two. One is, how can we help PE teachers do a better job of including and accommodating children? And related to that, of course, is how can PE teachers do a better job of making sure children with disabilities are having a really super experience when they're included in PE. Just this picture here looks like a young man who is having a good experience in PE. So let's begin with inclusion. When I talk about inclusion, what am I actually referring to? So this is a nice little picture here. You see some of the terms: respect and diversity and community and everyone. I think those are some key things. But I love this picture here. To me, this is, when I think of inclusion, this is what I think of. I think of a little girl here who feels like she belongs. She's a member of the group. She's happy. She's supported by her peers. And that to me is what inclusion in PE should look like. So these are some of those words that I associate with inclusion. And I should differentiate the term social inclusion versus physical inclusion. And so when I think of social inclusion, these are the things I'm thinking of. Someone who's in an environment where the PE teacher and the peers are welcoming, the child really feels belonging and acceptance and is really supported, with whatever disability they have, that they're going to have a chance to be successful. A good way of looking at this idea of social inclusion is this little picture here. So I think we all understand what exclusion is, and you can see on the far left where people with disabilities are clearly excluded. Segregated would be they have a special class by themselves, a special school in some cases. Integration is what one of my colleagues, Justin Hagel, has really wanted our field to use in the last 3 or 4 years, because he feels that, yes, children are physically in general physical education, but they're in their own little bubble and not really being socially part of the group. And I wouldn't disagree with them, and you'll see in my presentation today. And then inclusion is our goal. This would be where a child, again, is belonging, welcomed, supported, and really mixed in and a member of the group, not off to the side by themselves. So that's what we're working with here.
Dr. Block, we got you on mute all of a sudden.
Sorry, I got bumped out for some reason. Let me go back to my slides here. All right, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm in this brand new building, or it's only a year old, and our internet connection here is not great for some reason. So anyway, so I was talking about that. I've been supporting inclusion for years, since the early 90s, and I wrote some practical papers. One powerful debate I felt I had with a really famous adapted physical educator named Claudine Sherrill. We had this debate in the journal Palestra, and I mentioned, I wrote the title, Why All Children Should Be Included, and she wrote the opposition to that. And so I really feel it's appropriate. I've written some papers on how to make modifications, how to accommodate children. And again, I really think it's the way to go. I have, with some colleagues, have done some research showing that it can work. This was one paper where we included a little boy in a middle school, and it showed that it had no negative effects on the peers without disabilities. We've done some other studies like that. I've been really interested in attitudes of children without disabilities. Do they feel like children with disabilities should be included in their class? Are they happy to have them? And all the research we've done shows that they're very happy to have them. But one of the things we'll talk about is that no one really teaches the children without disabilities how to be a good accepting person, how to be a good friend. But they're happy to have the kids in the class. We've done some research. This is one of my former doctoral students, Kathy McKay. She's done some great work on using something called the Paralympic School Day model to help children have more positive attitudes. So that preface was just to say I've been doing it for years and I'm still a real fan. And I remember when I came down here to Virginia in 1992, I was really into inclusion, and my colleague Luke Kelly, who helped me get this job, said, you need to go out in the schools and see what the reality is. I said, I've been in the schools, I know. I said, yeah, you really need to go out in the schools and see what the reality is. So again, I go back to this picture here, and the reality is that yes, children are physically part of the group, but they're not socially part of the group. And so something's not working. We've been doing this since the 90s. That's going on 30 years. Why are we still struggling with this idea of social inclusion here? And this just, again, I've been talking about the 90s, but this is much more recent. There's been a lot of research where people have interviewed children with disabilities to find out about their experiences in general PE. One of the most famous ones, Donna Goodwin out in Alberta, has done some wonderful work on this. But you can see all over the world. And unfortunately, as a general rule, the children are not having great experiences, children with disabilities, whether they have physical disabilities. Holland looked at children with physical disabilities. Hutzler looked at physical disabilities. Holland looked at children with visual impairments. So what are some of the things that these children with disabilities talk about and their experiences? Well, they said they feel different, and yes, they are different, but how can a physical education teacher make them feel more welcome and supported and not so different, just like another child in the class? We talked about this idea of social inclusion, and these are children who are saying, I've been socially isolated. I'm not part of the group. I'm off to the side doing something different. Peers who I mentioned can be super supportive and want kids with disabilities in their class and are happy to have them, also can be very excluding. And again, I believe we need to do a better job of training the peers. So we've done some research. My former doctoral student, Aya Klavina out of Latvia, did some research on peer tutoring and things like that. And that's the great way to go. You just have to train the peers. And then PE teachers, that the students are saying that the PE teachers haven't been very accommodating my needs. So I go back to this paper I wrote, and I know Dr. Legg has written about this as well and used this. And actually, seeing one of his presentations, it spurred me to go back and look at what I wrote way back when. So 1999, that's going back 25 years now, almost 25 years. And I listed some problems that we were seeing with inclusion and why it wasn't going as well as I had hoped. Now you see part one, part two. Part two is me saying, this is still a great idea. This is how. Sorry, I got booted out again. Try it again. All right.
Wi-Fi is tough in Virginia these days, isn't it?
I know. So anyway, I went back and revisited this paper to see, are things still true today like they were 25 years ago? So in my paper, I had some assumptions that I said, the reason inclusion is going to work is because there are certain things in place. And as I went to the school, I saw that these things actually were not in place. So the assumptions were wrong. What are some of my assumptions? Well, number one were that PE teachers were prepared and confident. So again, this was 1999. So now we're looking in the present day. In 1999, we were just starting inclusion. Inclusion really started like 92, 93 here in the States. And so, yeah, PE teachers weren't really prepared. But now, 25 years later, of course, we're doing a better job of preparing them. Well, we're still only requiring one course in adapted PE for people who want to become PE teachers. And that course tends to be a survey course where you learn about Down syndrome and autism and visual impairments, but they never really spend a lot of time on, you're a PE teacher, you're in a volleyball unit, you have 50 kids in class, one of the children uses a wheelchair, how would you accommodate them? We don't get to that, which is unfortunate. So, and as a result, when we do research and interview PE teachers, they say, I don't feel confident and I don't feel prepared to do this. So that's one of the assumptions I made, that they were prepared and confident, and they weren't. Assumption number two was that the class sizes would mirror the class size in the classrooms. Down here, we have classes of, maybe 20, 25 students in a class, in a regular class, and they come down to the gym in your class. And, for 20 to 25 kids, you can do some teaching. Well, and down here, and again, curious what they do up in Calgary, down here, we often will bring 3 or 4 classes to the gym at one time. So it's not 20 or 25 kids, it's 60 to 100 children in the gym one time. And so that's difficult when you have a child with autism who already is sensitive to noise and sounds and comes down to the gym with some big sound muffling earphones. And now we have all these kids in the gym here. So class sizes are large. And I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns that PE teachers have, is that, I'm happy to include this child, but how do I do it when I have 75 kids in the gym? And I understand that. Now, to be fair to, not to the PE teachers, but to be fair, down here, it would be easy to say we have 3 groups of 25. I'm going to take my group out to the blacktop outside. You take your group out to the soccer field and you work out there, and I'll stay in the gym. So now we just have 3 PE teachers, each with a class of 25. That would be very manageable. But down here, what mostly we do is 1 PE teacher's in the front of the room teaching the whole group, and the other 2 PE teachers are in the back, kind of wandering around, providing support. So I also assumed back in 1999, and I assume today as well, that PE teachers would be motivated and excited to include children with disabilities. This would be a challenge. This, I know it's hard, but man, how can I figure out how to do this? I had a PE teacher down here. I remember coming to visit him a couple of times, and he was always on the internet. I said, what are you looking at? So I'm trying to figure out some games and how to include this kid. I mean, that's the type of attitude I thought we'd see more of, that I really want to make this work. Now, in 1999, it was very overt. I mean, PE teacher said, this is not my job. This is not, I was not trained to be an adapted PE teacher. I don't know how to include these kids. I don't want to include these kids. That was 1999. Today, it's more subtle. I mean, the PE teachers grew up with kids with disabilities, grew up with inclusion. So they're not like they don't want to do it, but they just don't seem real motivated to do things like they should, I think. So that's what I see. I assumed back in 1999, as I do today, that PE teachers would be teaching skills. This is a great picture. I see kids with their ready position to catch a ball. I'm assuming the teacher talking about, this is how you catch. You have your fingers in a certain position, you absorb the force. I'm going to teach you how to do these skills. That was my assumption back in 99, and I assumed that would be the case today. But when I go out to schools today, I see a lot of tag. I see a lot of chasing and fleeing. I see a lot of fitness testing. I don't see, if there's ball skills being done, no one's telling the kids how to throw and how to catch. And so it's if we're in a volleyball unit, and when I say unit, I say that very loosely because that may be about a week or 2 weeks. But if I see a volleyball unit, I say day 1, hey, boys and girls, this is a volleyball. This is how you do a forearm pass. This is how you do an overhead pass. All right, let's play. And that's it. And there's no teaching. And that bothers me. So that's another assumption I had, there would be teaching, and there wasn't. Another big assumption I had was that PE teachers would differentiate. One of the things we teach our PE teachers down here is something called extensions and refinements. And this is like the easiest thing in the world. So you say, for example, boys and girls, we're going to practice dribbling a basketball today. I have some cones set up, and I'd like you to dribble with your dominant hand in and out of the cones. All right. If that's too easy for you, challenge yourself by going faster. That's an extension. If that's still too easy, try using your non-dominant hand and go faster. Now, boys and girls, if dribbling through the cones is too difficult for you, this could be a refinement. Feel free to go slower and even walk if you have to. And if the weaving part is too difficult, feel free to just go straight and go parallel to the cones. I've accommodated 95% of the kids in my class by doing that. If that's my mindset, then I'm going to already accommodate most of the kids. And you tell me, oh, by the way, you have a child with this disability in your class, it's not going to be that difficult for me to add another extension or refinement. But when I teach to the middle or I teach to the high end, and now you ask me to bring in a child, it's, oh, I can't do that. I have no idea how to do that. So my concern is that PE teachers really aren't making the effort to differentiate. There's one way to do it. And if you can't do it, geez, I'm sorry, but then you're not going to be successful. And that's just not good PE. And again, I'm hoping to get some feedback from you all in Canada, say, oh my God, we differentiate all the time. We have small class sizes. All our PE teachers are teaching skills. You guys were really bad down in Virginia. So I'm hoping to hear that in Canada. I'll add another assumption here is that PE teachers are ableist. So in the last 3 to 5 years, I've been doing some work on social justice and ableism and this whole kind of area as it relates to physical education for children with disabilities. And I've come to understand this idea of ableism. And I truly believe that PE teachers and youth sports coaches are very ableist. So what is ableism? Well, ableism is discrimination based on this idea that I believe typical ability is superior and anything less than typical is going to be inferior. That's kind of the basic model there, and here's just the idea like racism and sexism. It classifies a group of people. We don't look at the individual. It's a group of people. And you're less than. And again, this idea of less than leads to stereotypes and generalization, and furthermore, negative experiences for the children with disabilities. So again, I could see a PE teacher, let's get this out of the PE realm. I can see a math teacher saying, math was easy for me when I was growing up. That's why I became a math teacher. I don't know why you guys are struggling with math. If you can't do math, you're less than, whatever, And a PE teacher, says the same thing. Shoot, I was an athlete when I was growing up. I played sports. All skills came easy to me. I was always very fit. So I'm not sure why you guys are struggling with this fitness test. I'm not sure why you guys are struggling throwing a football. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I can see where PE teachers could fall into that realm, but that makes it really difficult to include kids with disabilities. So I wanted to go through that fairly quickly so that we can have a long time for our panel discussion. You can kind of see the assumptions I presented here. So we're seeing here in the States, and I'm going to generalize to all 50 states because I'm pretty sure I'm pretty good with that we still see persistent issues of poor quality social inclusion. Okay, children have been physically in general PE for years, but this idea of social inclusion where they're really welcomed and a member of the group and supportive, we're not seeing that very much. So we're still really trying to work on some solutions to make it work here. And so that's kind of my brief introduction here. So I would love to get your feedback, and I'd love to get feedback from my doctoral students, Marie Leek and Christina Mertens. And what I love about Marie and Christina is both of them have a lot of experience. Marie is a general PE teacher, seeing what it's like from that viewpoint, and Christina from an adapted PE teacher, working with general PE teachers, trying to include children and seeing some of the problems they have. So I'm not sure, Marie and Christina, do you want to kind of jump in and start, and then we can open up for some questions?
Yes, hi, this is Christina. Thanks for the intro, Dr. Block. Yeah, I also am excited to kind of hear more about what is going on in Calgary versus the States here. But I think, similar issues can be seen in a lot of physical education classrooms. And, one thing that, I saw within my time, I started out in general PE, switched to adapted PE, and throughout my research is really understanding that the term inclusion kind of scares others off of what is inclusion, and fully understanding that definition. And we could probably go and have a whole day conversation of what is the definition of inclusion, what does that actually look like, and is differentiated instruction for all students, and how the differentiated instruction we do for students with disabilities can be utilized at the beginning of a school year for all students. And that's for activities, visual supports, behavioral supports. And so definitely want to touch on that. But Marie, do you have anything that you want to kind of intro into?
Thanks, Christina. So like Dr. Block said, I was previously a general PE teacher at the high school level. And now I've been able to work some as an adapted PE teacher, where I'm pushing into the general PE class. And so from getting to see both perspectives, for me, it's made it all the more important of how communication just needs to be ongoing between all the service providers. So the case manager, I'm not quite sure how in Canada, the special education works within the school, but at least in the States, we have case managers. And then we also have a classroom teacher, and then communicating with the PT and the OT, and just trying to see how we can all support each other's goals to ultimately support the student. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Marie. Thanks, Christina. So let's open it up. If someone would love to share their experiences in Calgary, I'd love to find out what PE looks like out where you all are. Am my assumptions wrong? Is Calgary different? Hopefully.
Thank you, Dr. Block, for that. I'll kick off the question maybe by really looping in one of the initiatives that the Calgary Adapted Hub continues to work on, which is not only what you've just talked about as far as what the educator's role is, but where do we see education start to integrate with recreation and sport, and maybe community physical activity, and then the family's involvement, other additional aid supports. What does maybe that look like within some of your research and the community work you're doing, as well as maybe any advice you have for those of us trying to make sure that that's a more seamless approach and support for the child?
Thank you. That's a terrific question. And it's an important one. This the whole idea of the seamless piece. I love that. So here's where we have our first big disconnect. So in the United States, there are very few adapted PE teachers. In our state here in Virginia, there are 150 school districts, around 150 school districts. We probably have 30 school districts out of 150 that have an adapted PE teacher. So the vast majority don't. I'm assuming Calgary is probably similar. So that means that the general PE teacher is that conduit to that youth sports recreation piece. And if there is a special program in a community, does that PE teacher know about it? So that's something that I don't think. So again, imagine a parent of a child with autism, or a parent of a child with a visual impairment or physical disability going to the PE teacher or to the special ed teacher and saying, my son would love to get involved with X, Y, and Z. His sister plays baseball. We'd love for him to play t-ball. Do you know of any programs around here where he could play? And the PE teacher and the special ed teacher, I can see the answer being, I really don't know anything. The better answer would be, I don't know anything, but let me go online and look and see if I can find something, because I'm sure our community has something. But I feel that it's too much like, I don't know of anything. That's a great question. I wish I knew. And it ends there. So unfortunately, that's a missing piece there. Some of our school districts, some of our local youth sport and recreation programs for people with disabilities, they are proactive in going to the schools and saying, hey, we offer these programs, you should be aware of it. We have a little bit of a weird situation where some of our schools are very reluctant to just send out flyers from the community to parents. And so sometimes met with a stone wall. Like, I know you want to send a flyer out or send emails out, but we're not allowed to do that. So you can't. So there's some barriers. So there are little pockets where we have things like Challenger baseball and special soccer programs. But how that gets communicated, I'm not sure if that gets done very well. So that we have a bit of a disconnect. I'd love to find out if anybody in Calgary can tell me how that's done there. I know you have some great community sports and recreation programs. How is that communicated out to the schools and the children?
That is one of our main objectives with the Calgary Adapted Hub is to hopefully make sure that there's communication amongst all of those groups. And so I'd say primarily a lot of our communication right now comes from the collection of what is happening in the community and which programs we're able to support that way. And then we're just working, in real time here with the school districts to make sure that they have access to that information as well. But I love what you've just explained there is that there's still another step, and that's actually getting it into the hands of the actual educator, the physical educator or the generalist that will be best supporting that child. And then one more step is the family. So, right now we're mapping all of that out, and there's a lot of people on the call today that are a big support of that. But I was interested to hear how you felt that was going in your area, and maybe some lessons that we can learn as we all navigate that together for sure.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. One of my former students teaches in a rural school district. He's in a college, a university, but it's in a very rural area. And he's created an adapted sports program. It has basketball, bowling, baseball, and he sends out flyers to 5 different school districts. So he really spreads the word and gets the information out. And that's great. And I know he works closely with families, and there's kind of a domino effect. One family hears about it and they tell another family, but it's just not as systematic as I would like it to be. And so unfortunately that is one of the challenges that we have. We have down here, we have a really strong Special Olympics program in my community, and that gets information out pretty well. But again, we still have that same stonewall where I'm not sure if it gets systematically to all the special ed teachers in our community who can then give it to parents. And so I would, I love that question, because how does that happen? How do we make sure that this great program we have gets to the parents so they can sign their kids up? And I'm not sure if we're doing very well with that.
This is Christina, and just to kind of jump off of what Dr. Block was talking about, and something that Marie touched on earlier is throughout the research within the states, but also my experience, I worked for a regional education program. So our program was contracted by the districts per service time. And so being able to work with the PTs, OTs, vision specialists, assistive technology, it was nice to be in such a collaborative department, but you didn't always see that in the schools. And I do think that's one of the biggest challenges to getting that information, like Dr. Block was saying, that maybe the PE teachers know about it or have heard about it, but are not giving it to the special education teachers. And there's that lack of collaboration. And, one initiative that the school district that I worked in, or that I was one of them that I was contracted in, and most of my case work was there, was we began, it was the first time when I started, they didn't have any adapted PE services. Most of their students weren't even going to PE, or their PE looked like walking around on the track for 30 minutes straight, at all levels. And so, coming into a school district, a pretty rural area of Virginia, it was definitely challenging to begin these adapted PE services and really translate what adapted PE is for parents and what it could be, and the possibilities that kind of lead to that, and how some of it can start in the school to really show and demonstrate to parents and the community what these students can do if they had more opportunities. And I know, kind of looking through some of your previous seminars, I know you maybe had a talk about not that one size fits all, and that every school is different, every school district's different. So, going and seeing what the needs are of the community. With this district in Virginia, we started to join a basketball league at the high school level, where our students that were enrolled in special education would play high school, basketball games, and it would resemble a varsity basketball game. And all of the practices were during our PE time, our adapted PE time. We would have some of the PE students come into the classroom to help out. We would have students be referees and some of those other roles, and start to talk with sports management department and see how they can get involved with, our athletic directors, and how they're leading the way to create these varsity type games. And this was the start to bring in the community to come to these games that occurred during the school day, so that parents, when they hear, one of the biggest inputs I had was when they hear special adapted, they're hesitant. They don't want their child to stand out anymore and have their disability any more visible. So I think that experience and being a part of that experience really showed the community like how awesome these kids are, and how there is a lack of these opportunities. So I would say that for Louisa, I know the school district that I worked in, having the experiences in school and then starting to work with others and other professionals is the start. And I know, still kind of keeping in contact, they are beginning to have more opportunities outside of those schools. So just one thing that I know, one of the biggest hurdles for parents is getting to different activities outside of the school time. So I would say, for that one district, that's been working for them, where they're really starting at square one.
Good.
Dr. Block, thank you for your talk. I was wondering if I could touch on that slide. You had talked a bit about training the peers, and ask, from a Calgary Adapted Hub perspective, some of our partners do run programs that are specifically adapted. I guess probably best in line with integration rather than inclusion, whereas other programs are very specifically inclusive. Anyone can take part. Do you have any suggestions around how to train the peers?
Yes, so thank you. And I think that's a huge missing element. Again, the research we've done and the others have done shows that children with disabilities have positive attitudes towards inclusion. But I think if we ask them, do you feel comfortable approaching a peer in PE? Do you feel comfortable being that peer's assistant or helping them? And I don't think they are, because no one's told them how to do it. So the other thing we have here is that we have our school district in particular, we're fairly affluent. So we have lots of teacher assistants who come in with a child with a disability. And so the peers see this child with an adult and said, oh, I probably shouldn't bother the child because there's an adult with them. And so there's just confusion. So going back to training, what do we need to do? I think the first thing we need to do is, when there's a child in included in a regular class, talk to the mom and dad, and if possible, talk to the child and say, we would really like to introduce this child to the peers in the class and let them know about the child and how to help him be included. I don't want to just do that and assume that that's okay with the parents and okay with the child. But if the parents and the child are okay with that, then you have the PE teacher, that could be a 10-minute, 5-minute talk. Billy's going to be in our class this year. He's a wheelchair user. You'll see him pushing his wheelchair and he gets tired sometimes, but we really want to make him feel welcome. These are some things we can do. When I say, let's get in groups of 3 to 5, let's make sure Billy is part of your group. When we're playing games, I would like you to help me figure out how to make some accommodations for Billy. Because, I'm not sure how to do some of these things. So we're doing basketball. How can we make sure Billy has a good experience here? And so we may play 3 or 4 games at once, with a regular high level game and some lower level games. Let's make sure Billy has a chance to participate. Make sure Billy is never isolated. you know, how do you feel if you're isolated? I want to make sure you feel Billy doesn't feel that way. I want you to make sure he's always part of the group. So there have been some books and articles written about training peers. It can be very extensive and very time consuming. I think it can be very brief and just say, we want Billy to feel welcome. We want Billy to feel socially part of the group and never isolated. We want him to have a successful experience. So when Billy goes home and mom and dad say, how was school today? Billy says, wow, PE was great. We played basketball and I made a basket. Or we played basketball today and I was on a team with 3 or 4 other kids and they really were nice to me. Wow, that would be great. It doesn't take, you know, a lot. So anyway, to summarize what I'm trying to say here is you really need, you just can't put a child with a disability in class and expect the peers to understand how. They're happy to include the child. They don't know how to include the child and make them feel welcome. So I think that's the piece that needs to be done. And that could be just a simple 5-minute talk with the PE teacher at the beginning of the year. I would repeat that again, probably every quarter. Hey, as a reminder, let's make sure Billy's having a successful experience. I think those things are good. If you have children who have unique behaviors like autism, then I think an additional piece is, you know, sometimes a child may get a little upset when the sounds are very loud or when we're playing tagging and dodging games. So just be aware of that. If he starts to cry or if he runs to the corner, you know, that's something he does, but that's okay. You know, sometimes if he has a hard time communicating, he might reach out and try to hit you or pull your hair. He's not trying to be mean. He just doesn't know how to say that he's uncomfortable in this setting here. So just find a teacher or his teacher aide, but, you know, don't be offended by it. So I think sometimes we need to add that little piece to it as well. So those are just some simple things, but I agree. It's got to be done. It's got to be done. And there's different models out there for doing it. Special Olympics has a nice model where they introduce disability. It's called So Get Into It. I mentioned the Paralympic School Day has some nice little ways to teach kids. But yeah, I think the key is you got to talk to the kids and let them know. Marie, did you have some children with disabilities in your high school class, and did you do any preparation with your students?
So the school I taught at, most of the students had been together since kindergarten. So by the time they got to me in high school, they knew all of each other. And so they were just from the start very accommodating. But what I did that I think helped was I adopted a modified sport ed model. So I divided the class into lots of small groups where I strategically grouped students that were more open to supporting a student with a disability. And I also think in the small groups, a student is more likely to approach a student with a disability when there's only 4 people in the group rather than it being one person within a group of 25 and having that's like, it seems more difficult. And I don't know, a lot of using a lot of team games and a lot of group activities instead of it being individual. I think that really helped encourage the non-disabled peers to interact and support their teammates. Yeah.
Good.
This is
Anybody else? Good, sorry.
All right, Dr. Block, didn't mean to cut you off, but you know, one thing that I think is so crucial too is when students, especially at the elementary level early, you know, one thing that I really noticed is they look to the PE teacher to understand, well, oh, this is a new student. They move differently than me. They talk differently than me, or they don't talk, or they behave a little bit different than me. And they look to the adults, they look to the PE teacher. And, you know, going to so many different elementary schools within 3 different districts, you really saw the difference when the PE teacher led by example. That, you know, the students that are coming in, especially those students with more severe and profound disabilities, they, you know, answer the questions of the students, kind of like Dr. Block mentioned, kind of acknowledged some of those differences, but led by example that these students are capable of, you know, participating and didn't always point out the negative behaviors and really showed and tried to incorporate them anyway. And I know a lot of the research, I look at paraeducators or educational assistants, I think often referred to up north where you guys are, but just that example of that these students, aren't made of glass. I always have one example that I had a high school group, severe and profound group, and when we came into the gym, there were 3 classes of PE, general PE classes, and the PE teacher blew the whistles and said, everybody stop, hold the balls, don't do anything, move. And we were like, no, that's okay, keep going. It's really okay that these students are way more capable and really showing and giving the students the opportunity that if you're unsure of how to incorporate the students, to number one, ask the student. If you are able to, ask the educational assistant, since they're with them all day long, really collaborate. And that collaboration is huge for getting that student involved. But just not always leaving them out because of that, safety, of course, being for all students, but the same that you would approach any other student. So just being that example, I think makes such a huge difference for students to understand how to interact with another peer.
Thanks. I'm going to show a video real quick. Hopefully this works, but this is, I think, a great example of when it works great. So these are 2 girls with very severe disabilities in middle school. So that our middle school is children around 11 to age 14. And the PE teachers at this school absolutely said, we're going to include everybody and make them feel welcome. And they would be honest to tell you, we're not sure how we're going to do it, but we want to make sure that that's the atmosphere, that's the vibe. And so they communicated that with the students. So this is kids doing rollerblading, and you'll see 2 peers pushing children with disabilities in the class. And I think you can clearly see that the peers are happy to be there, happy to help. And so I think it's a great little video here. So how do I make it big? All right. Are you looking at that, Christina? Am I good? Okay. All right, so I don't know if you can hear that little girl said, good job, Laurel. Let me stop sharing. So the question whenever I show that is, how did that happen? How did that happen? So you can't just put those 2 girls in the class, bring in their teacher aides and just hope everything's going to work out. The PE teachers had to talk to the kids without disabilities. I imagine the special ed teacher came in and talked to the kids. And they just made it clear that they're part of our group. We want them to be part of our group. The children with disabilities would love if you came up to them and talked to them, love if you were part of their group. We'd be happy you can push their wheelchairs and just, make them feel as welcome as you can. Those little things resulted in that. And that would be my dream, is that. You asked about how do we prepare peers. That's what happens if you do. If you take a couple minutes and talk to the peers, that's what you can have happen.
Hi, Julie, I'm in Cochrane. I'm an educational assistant coordinator. I just wanted to add in on watching that video too. I noticed the educational assistants or aides were nowhere near those children that were in the wheelchairs. So I think sometimes it can be, a little uncomfortable at times, but I think definitely giving those space for those organic grassroots, even if there are teachings, but for those opportunities, those things to happen, and giving that space, because not guaranteed, but chances are it might not happen if the educational assistants or teachers were standing right by those children in the chairs.
Absolutely. And just as the question was, how do we prepare children without disabilities? How do we prepare the teacher assistants, and I don't think anybody does that. That's Christina's research. I'll let her touch on that if she'd like to. But the key is that, what we see in our districts is that a teacher aide brings in the child, knows the child really well, knows their behaviors, know all those issues. The PE teacher sees that teacher assistant and goes, oh, great, I don't have to worry about Billy today because the teacher assistant's there. And the teacher assistant is left to her own devices, and she's thinking, well, they're paying me to be here with the child, I might as well be here and help. No one says your job is to make sure this child is socially included, that peers are coming and talking to the child, that you're backing up and letting the peers take over. You know, that's the same thing. It's a 5-minute talk. So we miss out on that.
So one of our realities in Canada, or specifically in Alberta, and again, I know there's a lot of people on the call that could enhance what I'm about to say, but quite often in our elementary schools, it's a generalist teacher who is providing any type of health and physical education to their students. So it's a classroom teacher. And so I can see that, you know, in some of our discussions today, especially with that emphasis around the social inclusion, there's a lot of possibility that we could enhance the training that happens before and during practicum placements and during the actual formal education prior to becoming an educator. So maybe just any advice or things that you've seen in your research or work around informing a generalist teacher prior to coming into the education space. And again, I think there's a lot of parallels then into the sport and rec space as well.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I was in Europe about 5 years ago, and I learned that that's the model in Europe as well, that they have generalists teaching elementary PE. So just for Marie and Christina, to let them know what you're talking about, is the elementary teacher who's teaching reading and math and science takes her turn, takes the kids down to the sport hall or to the gym, and they're expected to teach PE. And they probably had one course in PE and how to do that. So yeah, so that adds to the whole challenge piece there, and how do you make that work? But hopefully the general teacher is already in the realm of, okay, I have this child with a disability, I want to make him feel welcome. I'm already differentiating my math instruction, my science instruction. I should be able to just carry that over to PE. So in terms of, you asked the question about training, I think I would talk about that piece. You know, a big part of what you want to do is make sure all the children are physically active, but you also want to be successful. And that means that you might need to differentiate for your children. Not all your children are going to be playing soccer and be great soccer players. You know, there's some who aren't and haven't played very much. And so you need to make sure everybody has a chance to be successful, including that child with a disability. And we want to make sure everybody feels included, not excluded. So anytime you create an activity where there's going to be exclusion, then that's going to be a problem. So, you know, if I'm doing a training for these future generalists, one thing I might say is, you know, playing a game of tag is fun. The kids love running around and tagging. It's a good chance to work on locomotor patterns and things. But if you play tag and when you get tagged, you sit out, that's exclusion. What if we play tag where you stand with your legs apart and someone can unfreeze you by crawling in between your legs? Or you do one jumping jack and you jump back in the game. Okay. Or even better, make it cooperative. You get tagged, you hold whoever tagged you, you hold their hand, and we make this long chain so just giving them that mindset of, let's think of more cooperative ways to play tag as opposed to ways to exclude children. I think that's a fun one. One of my favorite games is there's an old book on cooperative games, but it's called Musical Hoops. So I'm sure you're familiar with musical chairs. The kids walk around, and when the music stops, you sit down, there's not enough chairs, so one child is excluded. Fun for birthdays, you know, years ago. Anyway, what happens is you're left with one or two children and everybody else is sitting out watching. With musical hoops, you have hoops, and you have the kids, when the music plays, they move. When the music stops, you stand inside a hoop. You start taking away hoops, but you tell the children they have to share hoops. So now instead of only one person in a hoop, there might be 2 or 3 people in a hoop. And you get to the very end where you only have one hoop and they're all trying to figure out how can we all get in or at least be touching the hoop. And this is a great way to make sure that child with a disability isn't left by himself or herself. Come on over here, you know, be with us, join us in our hoop, come, that type of a thing. So I think it's a mindset. You know, I want to make sure that kids are successful. I may need to differentiate, and I need to think of more cooperative activities rather than games that exclude people, you know, that type of stuff. So it sounds like class size is not going to be an issue at the elementary level if you have a generalist just bringing her children down there. So that's not an issue. Yeah, I think that differentiation piece if you just, again, it doesn't take a lot, I think, of training and discussion. It's just to get them into that mindset and understanding that let's have 3 different ways to do something. We're going to be playing, let's work on volleyball. I got some beach balls out of the closet. We'll be working on serving. If you're serving really well, you can grab a regular volleyball and move back farther from the net. If you're still struggling with serving, you feel free to continue with that beach ball and get closer to the net. Okay, there you go. I've just accommodated almost everybody in the class. So it's just those little things. If you explain and give some real concrete examples of how you can differentiate, I think they'll be more than happy. We're going to be running laps. Instead of everybody run 10 laps, we're all going to run for 5 minutes. I would love to see everybody run as much as they can. If you get tired, it's okay to walk, but if you catch your breath, try to run some more. Okay. If you see someone who's struggling, feel free to slow down and pace yourself with them and help them do better. So that way, if I can only walk using my crutches 1 lap in 5 minutes, that's okay, because the teacher said, go do as much as you can in 5 minutes. No one's counting. You just do the best you can. So just some simple little things like that, but they need to be communicated to the classroom teacher to understand that.
I just wanted to say, thanks for articulating so much of that. It's one of those things that, this doesn't only benefit the child with a disability in a classroom. It benefits, the kids that don't like physical activity. It benefits the kids that, feel like they're excluded for other reasons. And it's just such an important thing and that's often what I communicate as a physiotherapist working in school environments, is saying, like, this isn't you changing your classroom opportunities for one child. This is you making your entire class much more inclusive. And I think that's sometimes how we get the buy-in from those classroom teachers, is it's like, you're not changing your plan for a single child. You're changing your plan to make everybody more successful and to give master experiences to everybody in different ways, right? So that peer that is really engaged and does really well, now might get bored if you're kind of making the games different. So now they get a leadership role, right? And that's something that I think is such an important, valuable lesson to everybody in the class, that it's so useful. So I'm really happy to hear you articulate all those things, and it's a wonderful talk.
Good, thank you. Those are great examples. I love that idea of you're not doing this for one child, you're doing it for all the children. And again, I think the generalist. So my younger daughter is a 1st grade teacher. And she has children who are reading, they're 1st graders reading at a 5th grade level, and some who are reading at a pre-K level, and they're not even reading yet. So she has to have different books for them to differentiate. That you can't give them all the same book. That wouldn't make any sense. So right there, you take that concept and you say, we're going to do the same thing in the gym. Pretend we have different reading levels. We have different soccer levels. We have different fitness levels. How can we present things so that all the children are going to be successful? Just like you have a reading book for a 5th grader who's a great reader, we're going to have activities for your really skilled kids to make sure they're challenged and having fun and not bored. You have a kid who's at a pre-K level, isn't reading yet. We have some kids who haven't played soccer since they were, 5, or maybe they've never played soccer. Now they're in 5th grade. They're almost ready to leave the primary school. What can we do to make sure that they have successful experiences? So I just think that mindset. Again, I keep on harping on that word mindset, but I think that's so critical, is help them understand that. I love that it's not for one child. It's going to help all your children have successful experiences. It's great.
I think we've got time for one more question.
For Letitia, yeah, I'll open the floor first before asking that.
Anyone? Question, comment? All right, Ashley.
I'll be quick. One of the things we hear from a lot of the organizations that hire volunteers, or maybe 1st or 2nd year university students to work in running, whether it's a physical education program or a recreation program, is that the students are often, they're fearful of doing something wrong, right? They see the additional support needs that is required for some of their participants. They really want to be there to make sure it's a positive experience, but they're sometimes hesitant to act because they feel like they don't want to do anything wrong. So maybe just any advice you have, again, from the research or some of the collaborative work you mentioned, Christina, that might help some of those younger leaders do exactly what you've talked about today and adapt and diversify and differentiate what they're offering.
She specifically called out Christina, so I'll let you take the first shot at it.
Thanks, Dr. Block. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I have learned, and Marie and I have talked about this frequently, and kind of what Laura was mentioning, and that it's really a collaborative effort. And that's one of the biggest things, that you don't ever have to kind of approach this alone, that you can always reach out to others to get that support and get that help, especially younger individuals, to get more and more, your younger students incorporated with our students with disabilities, getting them to just begin the participation. So from this peer standpoint, I had students that would come in for that reverse inclusion. And at first they said, oh, I held back at first because I wasn't sure, I was timid, and just getting and allowing those opportunities for those students to interact. But I know I relied heavily on my physical therapist that I worked with, and other, professionals within the area that worked in Special Olympics, and just about transportation and different ways to engage the community, because it is such a collaborative effort to getting not only the classroom and generalist teacher to get incorporated into this. So one thing is just getting as much input from, other professionals as possible, and that communication, as Marie kind of mentioned earlier.
Yes, when I was teaching, I relied a lot on the case managers. Some of our schools have autism-based teachers or behavior-based teachers for different disability groupings. And so before the school year, I made sure I knew who was doing those jobs that year. I established relationships. So in case during class, I noticed that one of the students needed, whether it be a break or just someone to check in with them, I feel like they were so much more responsive to me emailing and be like, so-and-so, I think could use a break right now, or you might want to come and check in. So just being intentional about creating and maintaining those relationships with those professionals.
Yeah. I think it's normal to feel uncomfortable in that situation. I can remember some of my first experiences working with children with disabilities, feeling very uncomfortable, and it's a learning process. But yeah, making it clear that it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and feel free to ask someone. No one wants to hurt anybody. We want to make sure if it's going well, but yeah, ask is it okay to do this? Is it okay to do that? I think those are all good things. So yeah, yes, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and here's who you can talk to if you have questions. I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you for that. We're really keen to make sure they have lots of opportunity to gain experience. And so I think we want to reduce that hesitation so that there can be full involvement by all parties. So that's great.
Good. Yeah.
Well, that about takes us to time. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Dr. Block, Christina, Marie, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences with us today.
Our pleasure. That was fun. And if anybody has questions that you think we can help with, feel free. You all have my contact. We're happy to answer emails as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.